I'm Crystal DiMichele, and welcome to the Forces for Nature show. Do you find yourself overwhelmed with all the doom and gloom you hear of these days? Do you feel like you, as just one person, can't really make a difference? Forces for Nature cuts through that negativity. In each episode, I interview someone who is working to make the world more sustainable and humane. Join me in learning from them and get empowered to take action so that you too can become a force for nature. We often think of education as a means to an end, a way to land a job, climb the ladder, or secure financial stability. But what if education is something far greater? What if it's the key to freedom, to critical thinking, and even to bridging the divides that seem impossible to cross? My guest today, James Keyes, has spent a lifetime at the intersection of business, leadership, and education. As the former CEO of 7-Eleven and Blockbuster, he saw firsthand how an educated workforce isn't just important for corporate success, it's essential for the health of our society and democracy. In his book, Education is Freedom, The Future is in Your Hands, he makes a compelling case that learning isn't just about knowledge. It's about empowerment. In this conversation, we explore a fundamental challenge of our time: fear. Fear is at the root of so many of today's most polarizing issues: climate change, immigration, politics. It fuels division, spreads misinformation, and keeps us locked in echo chambers where we resist change instead of embracing its potential. James argues that the antidote to fear is learning, but not just any kind of learning. The kind that fosters curiosity, builds confidence, and allows us to truly listen to one another. We discuss how deeply ingrained narratives can create what James calls militant ignorance, a phenomenon where even the most intelligent people become so entrenched in their beliefs that they refuse to question them. He shares insights on how shifting our perspective, much like viewing the Earth from space, can reveal our shared humanity and common goals. And for those of us passionate about climate action, James offers a challenge. Are we framing the conversation in a way that invites collaboration, or are we unintentionally pushing people away? This episode is not just about education. It's about how we learn, why we learn, and how leading can lead us to a future of greater understanding, connection, and progress. Hi, Jim. Thank you so much for joining me on the Forces for Nature podcast. It's so great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be part of the show.
We are at EarthX. Tell me what brought you here in the first place.
I have been fortunate to know Trammell Crow for many years and have admired from a distance the work that he's done with EarthX and his efforts to help humanity. And when he saw that I had written the book, he asked me this year to speak. I've been here to EarthX before, but this is the first time I've been invited back as a speaker, and I was delighted to share the message.
You just today spoke about the book.
Yes.
What were you talking about? What was the theme?
Well, the purpose of the book, as sort of self-evident, Education is Freedom, is to really make a wake-up call for everyone that many of the issues that we have in this world, climate being one of them, is possibly best resolved through our collaboration, people coming together with knowledge. And that if you step back from it, climate is a metaphor for so many of the issues that society has today. It could be crime, it could be immigration, it could be war. Pick any issue, and someone on one side of the issue is afraid of something and then reacts or does something that causes fear on the other side of the issue. Climate's a great example. So here we have an ironic situation with climate where some of the most conservative or some of the most outspoken conservationists, if you will, are also those who are most upset about those who want to make climate change reforms. And it doesn't make any sense. You step back and you say, but wait, you're a hunter, you're a fisherman, you're a conservationist. But how can you fight against people who are trying to improve the planet? And then they say the other side of the argument, well, they're ignoring the economics. They're going to destroy the economy. And the irony is that many of those who are concerned about the planet are also concerned about their fellow man. And they too are worried about the economy and the ability for all boats to be lifted by the tide, if you will. But their concerns are not being adequately communicated so often because each side is so hunkered down in their respective position that they're not necessarily listening clearly, and the communication is not happening with the other side. So this was part of the message this morning. A lot of this problem that we have with climate issues, with immigration, with so many other issues in our world today is fear-based. And when you turn on the news, that's all you hear is a constant fire hose, if you will, of fear, fear, fear. They're coming to get you. They're going to take something from you. They're going to do something to you, right? And so the antidote to fear is learning and knowledge.
And communication,
and
like
communication.
We're doing today.
Exactly. And so that's my gift in the book, if you will. I've talked about the what, the how, and the why of learning, but the what is recognizing that change really equals opportunity.
So I want to go deeper into those three elements of the book. Let's take a step back first and tell me what got you into education, because you did start in business.
Yeah, I've been privileged to have the leadership role at two Fortune 500 companies, and both 7-Eleven and Blockbuster. And from the helm of a major worldwide corporation, you have a very different perspective of the world. You see things from a very different angle. And one of the challenges that I saw is that we have a supply crisis of one of the most valuable resources that any corporation has. We don't think of it this way sometimes, but it's the human resource. And an educated workforce is critical to the success of any company. This goes all the way back to the Rockefellers and the industrialists who recognized the need to technically mass produce an educated workforce, which they did in building the public school systems that we know today. But that model doesn't necessarily fit our needs today, in the information age especially. And so sitting at the helm of a corporation, we saw the inadequate supply of an educated workforce trained in the way we needed, which is a breadth of knowledge and some depth potentially. But we decided to go into the school system, and particularly the public school system, and help build a bridge between those students and jobs, and to say, here is the path, and knowledge is your key. This education system is your key to unlocking unlimited opportunity. With me being a poster child for that, having grown up virtually with no one in my family that went to school. Wow. So for me, it's easy. It's an example that I've been able to live, and I wanted to help share that message with others that anyone can do this. It's just a matter of knowing the path and being able to help them find it. So that was the purpose of creating the Education is Freedom Foundation over 20 years ago, is to help particularly public school children who may not have that clarity of direction to be able to find through knowledge, through knowing what to learn, how to learn, and why to learn, their own path to success.
It sounds like that you were bringing the value of knowledge to them. Because I mean, we were all kids in school, and I can think back and remember, like, why am I here? Like, why am I learning this? Why do I need this? This is useless, blah, blah, blah. And you were helping to show them why it's important. And in the book, you go into 3 key points of what, how, and why to learn.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So can you go deeper into what?
Sure. But before we do, though, that you hit on a really important point. The value. Again, I'm a business person, so I can't help but relate to value. And I see these young people today, and it was no different when I was growing up. They see value in terms of salary, money.
Yes.
The book is entitled Education is Money, or Education is Wealth. It's Education is Freedom. One of the inspirations I had was my father, who was a really hardworking guy, worked in a factory, And he didn't want that life for me. And I thought it was because he wasn't making much money. He wanted me to go make more money. And he said, no, son, that's not it. I want you to have the freedom that I don't have. I'm trapped in my job. I have to work these shifts, and then I have to work on weekends to just try to make enough money for you and your brothers and sisters to live. And he had spent some time in World War II, and he was fascinated with the culture on the Burma Road, meeting people of all different cultures. And he wanted to share that with me. He wanted so badly to take me to Southeast Asia or to other places and to see and experience what he did as a result of being a soldier in World War II. But he couldn't afford it. And he kept saying, I want for you the freedom to explore this world and to have the ability to, not because you're in a war, but the ability to see and learn and exchange with people from all over the world. That's freedom. And it's not about money. It's about having the freedom to do what you want to do. So that's part of the message I was trying to impart in the book into these young people, that, to your point, the value proposition isn't, I just want to go get a job. It's a trap. My brothers and sisters fell into that trap. They went to work for the factory because they wanted a nice car and they wanted to get a job that would pay for that car. I took a different route and took the longer route. No immediate gratification. I'm going to, in fact, go into debt while I give myself the opportunity down the road for a life of more freedom, which is what I do enjoy today.
To clarify for me, the what element, it's the what you should learn, or it's what is the what element in your book?
The what, the how, and the why. I call them the meta skills, if you will. These are the things that there's not a class on what to learn. Well, yes, you should learn math, you should learn science, you should learn reading. Those are the traditional what to learn, but stepping back from it, those softer skills or the meta skills are dealing with change, because change is going to happen. There's no class that I remember on change management. How do I change, particularly in high school? But the reality is change is going to happen. There's no class on confidence. What do I do when that change does happen? How do I respond? And do I respond out of anger or fear, or do I respond by using information to make the most informed response that I can? And then how do I communicate that? First of all, how do I understand that change? Through listening, through learning. And how do I react to that change in terms of my communications to others around me that gives them the confidence that we're in the right direction? So those three things, change, confidence, clarity, are three elements that I've found are critical to the success of an individual in any role. They are critical to your success in family life, if you think about it, because you're going to run into changes in your family life. And it's not the change, it's how you react to the change that everyone's looking at that will determine how your family responds. It's the confidence that you show, that you're not intimidated by it, you're not afraid of it, you're prepared to move forward. Even if that change is awful, it could be a devastating, could be a gut-wrenching problem that you encounter, but on the other side could be opportunity. You just don't know at that time why it is you're having to experience it. And then finally, that communications, that clarity of communications piece, being to truly understand, listen to each other, learn from each other, and understand the situation. We talked about climate as a great example of this. Is climate change an example of change? Yes. Is it bad change? Yes. Could there be a silver lining in this horrible, catastrophic thing that's happening to our planet? Maybe it was necessary to have us come out on the other side. I have a river that I grew up with called the Blackstone River in Massachusetts. I never knew which color that river would be. It could be green, it could be blue. We'd joke about it. Ugh. And the smell was horrific. Today they fish in that river, they boat on that river. But that change was resisted by so many. Yeah. And we thought the river was dead. But the river today is more vibrant and alive than it has been for 100 years. That's the That's the positive change that ended up occurring, right?
Mhm.
Someone had to have the confidence to take on the challenges of that change. There were mills that were producing linens and clothing, and they were dumping waste into the river, and it was an economic challenge to those mills to have to change. But look at the result today, and they made it. They made it through, and everyone was better for it. So confidence was a factor. And then ultimately that clarity of communication. Was someone really truly able to listen to those factory operators and say, we can't do this too quickly or we will put thousands of families out of work. So we have to be somewhat sympathetic to their challenges. But on the other hand, we can't let them keep dumping these dyes and this waste into the river. So let's listen to their concerns and let's together collaborate and have clarity of messaging and communications about what the timetable is and what the plan is, so that we create a win-win for the community and for that factory and for the employees of that factory. This is not rocket science at all. It's fundamental human nature, but it is overcoming the element of human nature that causes us to resist and to fight or to withdraw.
I'm so glad that you said that and you brought up opportunity, because in the environmental world, in the climate change mitigation world that I come from, we look at it so often as this fight and this, I mean, it is horrendous and terrible and can be an existential crisis if we wanted to look at it that way, but that also just really brings you down. And so I started looking at it as an opportunity, because you're right. Fossil fuels, for good or for bad, they got us to where we are today, and they've given us so many incredible, wonderful things. So you can't poo-poo that, but we are now at a point where we have this opportunity to change and create an even better world, a more equitable world, a more just and beautiful, healthy and humane world. And so that's the way that we should look at it. And through education, I love the idea of instilling in people the confidence to change and not be afraid of fear and whatnot. The back of your book says, our freedom of self-determination has a prerequisite, an informed electorate. If that electorate is armed with false information or is influenced by outside forces, their actions and reactions can put democracy in jeopardy. And that right there, to me, is so on point with where we are right now in the US and in the world in general. And so let's talk a little bit more about that. How do we get to this point where people do feel like they're informed? I've spoken to many people who are preaching things that are misinformation, but they believe it's to be true. So how do we move past misinformation? How can we separate what is a false truth and what is, I guess you could say, true truth,
True truth.
for without a better way of saying it?
I tried to understand that for the book. I did a lot of research for the book because I knew I had to tackle these difficult issues. There's so many very intelligent people today doing so many really silly things and saying some pretty silly things on both sides of the argument.
Yeah.
And so I tried to look at it, and I looked back at history, and I found evidence of people who have tackled this problem. And there's one expression that I heard that was called militant ignorance. I was like, oh, wow, what's militant ignorance? That means someone that is knowledgeable, someone that is intelligent, someone that's armed with data, but they have surrounded themselves with others that are so steeped in a point of view that they defend what could ultimately be totally counter to their values, to what they really truly know is right or wrong, but they've been reinforced in almost in a tribal way by others who can help them believe that the other side is evil and wrong. And so even though their argument is not pure, they believe they're on the side of good versus evil or right versus wrong. Mm-hmm. And this is creating polarization. You look through history and you see entire societies that have been crushed by this polarization. and this militant ignorance that causes people to hunker down and even go to war over issues. So as I tried to research this, I was shocked at the knowledge of the ancient philosophers. They saw this coming in society. They saw it in their own society so often. And they spoke about this power of fear as a motivator. You can motivate people through hope and inspiration, or you can motivate them through fear. And fear is sometimes easier. It requires less creativity and less imagination and less communication. You just scare people. And if you get enough of them on board, then it reinforces itself. Then you don't have to keep scaring them because they scare each other. They band up into a secure tribe and protect themselves from all those other people on the outside that are threatening them. And they forget sometimes what they're even threatened by. So this has happened throughout society. This is not unique to us right now. But interestingly, our founding fathers knew this. And they said, Jefferson, even de Tocqueville, coming from France and looking at our democracy, said this democracy works, but its sustainability depends on an educated populace, because they have to have the ability to have critical thinking, the ability to have curiosity, the ability to have free speech, to be able to challenge each other and not to give in to this militant ignorance that can tear societies down.
And it could be either side, both sides.
Both sides, yeah. They're both guilty of it often. And in the course of trying to write the book, and I tried to find another example because I knew people wouldn't really relate to ancient philosophers. So I turned to Yoda. True. Star Wars had some wonderful lessons in it. And Yoda in Star Wars, when teaching young Luke, made this point. He said, Luke, ignorance leads to fear, and fear leads to anger, and anger leads to violence. And
you
that's
see that nowadays.
And we see it. We see it all over. We see it in the news. We see it in government. We see it among friends, sadly, that band up against other friends. And Yoda's message to young Luke was quite relevant in today's terms. He said, the antidote to that is understanding, knowledge, because knowledge leads to hope, and hope leads to understanding, and understanding leads to peace. And so now in Yoda's case, he was encouraging Luke to use the Force. Now the Force could be a metaphor for one's faith, and it doesn't matter what faith, because faith does give you a belief in something bigger than yourself and confidence. But faith combined, that faith in whatever your faith is, whatever your religion is, if you have no religion, if you still have faith in the universe delivering for you, whatever it is, that combined with knowledge, your ability to truly think and be able to have critical thinking, be able to listen to each other, that will allow you to reverse that cycle of negativity and fear and to replace it with one of positivity and hope. The climate challenge is a perfect opportunity for us to do this, to see the plus, the good things. We're going to save our planet. Our planet's going to be better. That Blackstone River is better today than it was for hundreds of years because someone took the action. Mm-hmm. And we can do this now. But sometimes, as with any crisis, you have to be shocked into the need for change. But then you come outside of that change a better person.
I think conservationists and environmentalists have been really good on the shock factor. I feel like we've come in and we've used the doom and gloom narrative for so long, but we're starting to realize that that's not getting us where we need to go. And so there needs to be more than just the shock factor, because I think that also creates this feeling of
anger.
Exactly. Yeah. It creates this anger in the people who are affected by it, and this complete misunderstanding and lack of wanting to understand why somebody else isn't feeling that same way.
Right.
And so for the listener of this show who probably labels themselves more as a conservationist or an environmentalist or whatnot, how can we avoid our own militant ignorance? How can we
Yes.
move past that and work with the other side of the aisle?
Thank you for asking. I have so many things I would love to be able to share and recommend. And let me just give you an analogy outside of climate, because I think people can relate to this one. I just spoke at a very, very conservative group who, if I said the word diversity or DEI, would be all over me. I have a chapter in the book called Cultural Literacy. And what I explained is that in that chapter, I talk about how much we need to learn from each other. And I give examples about myself as an American studying in the UK and being a minority for the first time and having people make fun of me because I was a Yankee. I was from the United States and I didn't speak the way they spoke. And I had all kinds of American quirks and I was the minority. And ironically, the minority there were Pakistani, Indians, etc., and they embraced me faster and in a warmer way than my British friends, and I couldn't understand that. And I got to know them, and I got to know their culture. So I tell this whole story about cultural literacy and how I came away with this beautiful understanding of different cultures, whether it was Pakistanis or Indians or even my British friends who I ultimately did adapt and warm up to their culture. But it required an adaptation. It required a conscious effort for me to change, have confidence, and have clarity. Those three things, right? I put them into place and it worked. And I characterize cultural literacy as an opportunity for everyone to learn from people who are not like us. Because when we surround ourselves with people just like us, who think like us, look like us, talk like us, we're just in a little bubble. But the world is a rich place, a beautiful, rich place. And we become this patchwork quilt of everyone we encounter. So why not chase the opportunity, welcome the opportunity to learn from people who are very different from us? Well, this very conservative crowd was very warm to that idea. Now, if I said, I want to talk about DEI, it would have been all over me. It would have been, the conversation would have been over very shortly.
Who's this guy? Why is he here?
Why in the world is he talking to us, right? But they embraced it. And this is a good example because we deal with the same issues in climate. And I'll give you an example of one. I was an early adopter of a Tesla. And I also sit on the board of an oil company. Well, my oil company friends were horrified. They're like, why would you drive one of those things? It's just, it's horrible. What are you doing? Are you crazy? And
I'm so excited to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. Well, I'm an early adopter, so I saw it as technology. I didn't buy it because it was a battery. I didn't buy it because it was good for the planet. Yes, it is. And I am an environmentalist, and I do want to do the right thing for the planet, but that's not why I bought the car. I'm an early adopter. I bought it because it was new. What I discovered is that this has nothing to do with the battery, that the reason that people love the Tesla is it's like driving an iPhone. I could sit there, I could put on a roaring fire on the screen during the holidays. They had an app called the Yule log or something that was like, you're driving down the street and you get a fireplace on the screen. It was cool. There was your listeners may be offended by this, but my wife pointed this one out. There's a fart button, an app. And I was like, what is that? And she pointed it out, and it's for the kids. And there's like, you can make a noise come from each seat in the car. And the kids just love this, right? Now, General Motors would I don't know if General Motors would ever put that into their car. Point is, the car is like a phone in that it upgrades itself. It creates new apps. The whole dashboard, you get on the phone one day, the whole dashboard is new, and it's got all new stuff on it, new capabilities, new functions, so that going from that back into a traditional piston engine car that doesn't have that capability was like stepping back in time. Now, we never hear about the attributes of electric cars from the perspective of the consumer and the technology and why it's fun to drive and why it does so much more. What we hear is oh, you want to drive it because of the battery or this, and the battery is that, and all these negatives surrounding it. So it's a matter of almost as in my analogy with the cultural literacy versus using the word diversity. If we can find ways to address the opportunities within climate that are not going to trigger the other side to hunker down and resist immediately, and find the positives and talk about the hope, where we're heading with the technology and the capabilities. It sounds horrible from someone who used to run 7-Eleven, but it was such a pleasure not to have to go stop and fill up for gas. Right? It's just a convenience. These are the positives that I don't think we talk about enough. We get pulled into the fight.
Exactly. We get pulled into the fight.
We do.
And if we could just learn what the other side values, we might just realize that we have the same end goals, just different ways of getting there. So let's go back to the how and the why to learn that you talked about in your book, because I totally sidetracked us. How do you suggest people learn?
Well, interestingly, the how to learn is something that I think we all knew as children. In fact, we did it almost naturally as children. And yet, many of us have either forgotten or have been discouraged or just perhaps even some of us got a little lazy. So here are the three hows that I've outlined in the book. The first is critical thinking. And critical thinking is something that we learned at a very, very early age. I like to compare it to the scientific method. The scientific method taught us to have a hypothesis, put an action in place, and then step back and measure the results, and then take it full circle and re-establish a new hypothesis based on new scientific evidence, what we found out, what happened. And that process, that very, very simple process of critical thinking is something that doesn't just belong in the lab. Every business decision I ever made as a business person required, ironically, that same process. You have a hypothesis, you put an action in place, and then here's what so many of us forget, especially as business people. I can say we were all guilty of this. We just move on to the next thing. We don't take that next step of measurement and then evaluate the results. And based on new information, we change our plan. And that's part of the learning process, right? The learning process is trial and error, but learn from your errors. Trial, put something in place, measure the results. If I don't like what I got, I take a new action and I start over. And that continued process of trial and error is a process of critical thinking that if you dial forward and you look at today and you look at society and you think about how we take things at face value on the internet because it said so, and we don't then take that next action of gathering the information necessary to assess that. And was it true or was it false? Was it real or was it fake? So that process of critical thinking it's integral to our learning process and our development process as humans, but it's also integral to a democratic people, a society of people that want to establish their own self-determination, because if they don't have critical thinking, they will just take at face value whatever a leader should say and blindly follow. So that's one, how to learn, re-engage our critical thinking skills. The second is...
How do we do that? Sorry to interrupt, but how can we do that as adults, not in a classroom? Do you have any suggestions?
The first is awareness, is to be able to just be aware that there is a process here, and it's a discipline that we have to re-engage with to remind ourselves not just to take at face value. And I'll give you an example I use. On the cover of my book, I have a picture of the globe. And I call this perspective. When you step back and you look at the planet, you have a very different perspective, and you don't see borders, you don't see wars, you don't see races, etc. You see this beautiful planet Earth. When you then return to Earth from space and you turn on television or the internet, you get this barrage of perceptions. And it's that difference between perception and perspective that I'm encouraging everybody to embrace as part of the learning process. Perception is what you immediately think when you see something. It's a reaction. Perspective is when you step back from whatever it is that caused that perception to exist and engage your critical thinking to ask why. The basic question, why? And it's very simple to do, but we have to have, as humans and adults, we have to have the discipline that we were taught in grade school to ask why.
With everything we read nowadays and see and hear.
Exactly. And that asking why leads me to the second how of the learning process. It is literally curiosity that we were all born with. And if you have any children under the age of 5, you know that you have probably been guilty too of saying, don't keep asking me why. Because that's all kids ask, right? Why? and and it's a healthy process. They want to know. They're naturally curious about their environment, about everything. And so they drive you crazy asking why about everything they see, they touch, they do, they're told. And yet as adults, we forget and we stop asking why. But if we can engage that natural curiosity, our childlike curiosity about everything around us and be curious about how does it work? Why is that position that person's taking? Why is it being driven? And what is the reason for their position? Is it me? Is it them? Is it something about the way they are responding or reacting to a circumstance, et cetera, et cetera? So that question, why, is a fundamental part. That curiosity is a fundamental part of learning.
Nice.
You ready for the third?
Of course I'm ready for the third. Definitely.
Okay. So if you've got a recognition that critical thinking, the process of trying something and learning from your mistakes and then collecting data, et cetera, is an important part of learning. And you can re-engage with the question why, with that natural curiosity. So critical thinking, curiosity, and then the third C that I've tried to capture in this simple 3-step process for how to learn is creativity. Einstein once said, it's my favorite quote that I used to lead off this chapter on creativity, is that creativity is intelligence having fun.
I love that.
Right? And it's so true. And think about something as fundamental.
It makes a lot of sense.
It does.
When you think about it. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And it truly is. So many of us use our left brain and we're very good at technical things. And yet someone says, why don't you, here's a microphone, go sing some karaoke. And we go,
well, I don't think you'd want that of me, at least.
But I would. And here's why. There is no such thing as bad. Creativity is about expression. And even if you stood up and recited the words instead of singing them, it would be your form of expressing yourself. And if you can get over that, and here's an important part of learning, if you can get over that fear, resist that fear of creativity, then you're completely open to learn, because creativity is integral to the learning process. You have to be able to not be afraid to express yourself and let yourself use your right brain in a creative way to solve problems.
And I heard recently too, or I saw a headline or something along the lines of when you're being creative, when you're in that state, you're not anxious, like you're replacing the feeling of anxiety. So it actually helps to calm you down and give you flow. Even if you're not, quote unquote, the creative type.
Right, exactly. No, it releases a new kind of energy. And to this point though, this idea that you're not the creative type, it's a narrative that we have been told since we were children. And if you go back, you trace through your own personal history. Why do you think you're not a creative type? You may have, as a child, painted outside the lines or colored outside the lines in your coloring book. And what were you told? Bad, bad, not good. Now, I like to joke that my mom, when I did my first paint by numbers painting, and it was horrible because I didn't stay in the lines on paint by numbers, I joke that my mom probably looked at that and said, "My son's an impressionist," because it didn't matter at the end of the day. I was 5 years old and trying to paint. What's important is I was expressing myself, and yet we're told what's good and bad. And the reality of art, if I'm talking to students, I say, I want you to go to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. If you ever think you're not creative, I want you to go to the Museum of Modern Art. And what you're going to see is a box of rocks. And somebody has expressed themselves with a box of rocks. And that box of rocks may be worth millions and millions of dollars. And it's there in the Museum of Modern Art, right?
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. So tell me that someone can say that that's good or bad art. It's art. It's an expression. And so my point is there's no such thing as bad when it comes to expressing yourself creatively. And if once you get over that hurdle of not being afraid, then you're also over the hurdle of being afraid to learn.
Excellent. So we talked about the what and we talked about the how. And now I want to hear your perspective on the why to learn. It seems like a pretty obvious question, but not necessarily.
Well, it wasn't obvious even to me that I needed to address the why to learn. It seems, as you said, of course, you should learn because you should learn. But a friend of mine, in reading my first draft, said, "Jim, why are you writing this book? What is the why? Why should people learn?" And he was right. And so I stepped back and thought about the pieces of this puzzle I was trying to put together to paint the picture of the importance of learning, and not just learning as a child, but lifelong learning. And why is it critically important? So I stepped back and I found, again, trying to keep things simple, 3 C's. I've tried to make this something that you could remember, the 3 C's of why we learn. And so here they are: collaboration, cultural literacy, and character. And let's start with the collaboration. The reality is that at least I never had a class in high school, grade school on collaboration. The reality is you get out of school and you get into the work world and you realize, oh my gosh, it's not up to me anymore. There's no like test that I get an A or B on. It's me working with these other people. And I first discovered it when I was in graduate school, and I had to do case studies, and I thought, this is a dreadful experience. I have to rely on somebody else for my case study grade in graduate school and business school. It's a horrible thing. I don't want to rely on them.
Yeah, my stepson is in college right now and going through the same motions.
Well, you should share this story with them then, because it's a classic. So my first case study was in accounting, and in accounting class, and I had never taken an accounting course in my life. My first one was in business school. And so all of a sudden, my apprehension that I was going to have to rely on somebody else for my grade came down to relief, because in my case study group, I had an accountant from PwC, one from Deloitte. I mean, they were CPAs. We were all in core accounting at Columbia Business School. So here's what happened. We got into the case study, and I thought I didn't have anything to contribute at all. But it turned out that my lack of accounting discipline and knowledge let me we were comparing 2 companies and the balance sheets of 2 very different sized tech companies. And I came up with the idea that let's factor them, let's put them both on an even percentage, on a percentage basis, and let's come up with a factor for them. And the accountants, the trained accountants, of course, said, you can't do that. It's not, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole host of reasons that wasn't technically correct. But my creative solution ended up working. We got an A on the exercise, and I actually contributed as a result to an accounting case study, even though I had zero background in accounting. And it was the creative contribution that I made to the team that, with their technical skills and my creative recommendation, we ended up with an A on the project that I could not have done alone. So it was a great case study in itself on the power of collaboration.
Yep, that is certainly good. And you have two more C's. Oh, wait, you already told us about cultural literacy with your DEI story. Is that right?
It is. It is.
Okay. So we covered it.
Yeah, we may have covered it, but let me give you another one for cultural literacy because I've been talking a lot about one and it's been a popular. I may have done it with you already, but maybe not. Let's try it.
Okay, great. Shoot.
Once you've mastered the art of collaboration, you're going to realize that looking around, collaboration is going to require collaboration with people that are not like you. And that's really hard for many of us if we don't have the experience. I actually have an example of the challenge here and the opportunity through an analogy with music. I was chairman once of the Dallas Symphony, and in that role, I had the privilege of attending rehearsals. And I remember sitting in a rehearsal one day, and this is during the early push for DEI and diversity and all this stuff. And like many people, I was scratching my head and saying, is this really a critically important thing, or is it, something that we should double down on? And I was looking at the instruments and I was thinking, what if the instruments were people? And that if those instruments were human, that they'd be making fun of each other, that they'd have a hard time thinking that the violin's looking at the bass going, man, you're way overweight. And the bass is looking at the oboe saying, you're just weird. You're not even one of us. You're funny looking and man, you sound funny. Right? Don't you know they would? They'd all make fun of each other. And yet the conductor then steps up with his baton at the podium, taps the podium, and brings them all together. And what comes out? An amazing harmony that it would not be possible by any one of those instruments or any like group of instruments. Like even the bass and the violin together would not be what they are in the orchestra without the brass, without the percussion, without that oboe. And so to me, that's a wonderful metaphor for the power of cultural literacy. Once you understand each other and the contribution that each of you can have to the whole, then you have much more respect. You still may think, well, you're different, but together we can be better. And that's the why of cultural literacy.
Now, do you think that we need a conductor, though, in order to get all of us to play this beautiful music together?
We shouldn't, but that's the reality is that's the role of leadership. For whether it's a corporate CEO, whether it's a chief of state, the idea is that a leader should be the one that recognizes the power of our differences to come together to make us perform in harmony together. It's always a challenge, though.
Yes, always a challenge.
Always a challenge. Some leaders don't see that opportunity, have a harder time in bringing people together. But it's all part of learning. And it's really the why of learning. Because if you don't recognize this opportunity and you can't learn those differences, then you don't have a chance of bringing people together.
Yeah, that's true. And the final C?
Well, the final C is in many ways the most important of all, of the why to learn, because we often forget, like with collaboration or with cultural literacy, that we're just not on this planet alone. We're not in a company alone. We're not in a country alone. And so the character that each of us have, that final C is character, really represents, in many ways, I characterize it as our brand. So just like when we go to the store, we're looking at that shelf and we see a whole host of brands, but your preference may be Coca-Cola, my preference may be Pepsi. And that's fine. They can be different preferences. But when you look at that product, you develop an impression based on the external appearance of that product. So yes, Appearance matters. How we carry ourselves matters. But what's even more important, you'll even overlook a bad package design if you know the integrity of that product inside. And so far more important than the external appearance of that product is what's inside. And when it comes to humans, integrity, gratitude, humility, compassion, all of those things that we may learn in church, we may learn in our family, we may learn from social groups, but it's an important element of why to learn, because we have to learn the importance of our character. I use the example of the Boy Scouts. When I was a child, they baked into my head that a scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, thrifty, clean, brave, reverent, all of those things that are still in my head so many years later are character elements that I had to learn the importance of, but they have helped to create a brand for me that when I do interact with others in the business world or just in a social setting, hopefully that brand character will come through.
Yeah, we have to get back to these values and learning these character traits because they're what makes us better people and better communities. Jim, this was a great conversation. I learned so much from you, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. Thank you for all that you're doing. You're making a difference.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And I hope in these times when there's so much division in the world and so much fear in the world, that's really my mission, to try to remind everybody that we really have so little to fear, because if we have knowledge and any any form of faith or belief in ourselves, there's really nothing to fear. And so much of the challenge out there in society is rooted in people's fear and insecurity. So to me, knowledge, what to learn, how to learn, why to learn, that's the antidote, the best antidote we have to being afraid.
What if the biggest barrier to progress isn't a lack of solutions, but how we think about change itself? Chatting with Jim left me reflecting on how fear and misinformation keep us divided, especially in the environmental space. We often assume that if people just had more information, they'd get on board with climate action. But as James pointed out, facts alone aren't enough. They have to be paired with curiosity, confidence, and open communication. His point about militant ignorance really gave me pause. Regardless of how good our intentions are, have we in the environmental space become so entrenched in our own perspectives that we've stopped listening? Are we so focused on the fight that we forget to invite others into the conversation and actually listen to their side? After all, Jim reminded us that real learning isn't just about absorbing facts. It's about perspective. If we truly want a healthier, more just world, we have to engage with those who think differently, challenge our own assumptions, and frame climate solutions as opportunities, not threats. Of course, easier said than done. But at the end of the day, education isn't just about what we know. It's about how we use that knowledge to build a better future. What do you think? Shoot me a note through the link in Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or an email. Let's keep the conversation going and learn from one another. I'll chat with you soon. Don't forget to go to forcesfornature.com and sign up to receive emailed show notes, action tips, and a free checklist to help you start taking practical actions today. Do you know someone else who would enjoy this episode? I would be so grateful if you would share it with them. Hit me up on Instagram and Facebook at Becoming Forces for Nature and let me know what actions you have been taking. Adopting just one habit could be a game changer, because imagine if 1 million people also adopted that. What difference for the world are you going to make today?